Be Dr. Dvorko. She is the Regional Program Director of the Massachusetts Export Center and the Massachusetts Small Business Development Center Network. She's based at Worcester State College. Dr. Dvorko assists central Massachusetts companies in all aspects of international trade and coordinates export programs and seminars in the area. She's over 15 years of business experience in several countries, including Russia, Sweden, and the U.S.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know that we had a lot of statistics today already, but I actually followed through on something that was said before today about U.S. exports to China versus Massachusetts exports. China is the fifth largest market for Massachusetts in 2009. And here, nobody brought that up. These are the product categories, the top 10 that Massachusetts exports to China. Massachusetts actually was a latecomer to the Chinese export arena because we have more highly value-added products, so to speak. So Massachusetts was traditionally oriented towards North American markets and European markets. And when you run different statistics, and I did that right before I came up here, so I know that one of the slides, I think, a gentleman from Deloitte was saying that while U.S. exports to China were growing by over 300% from 2003 to 2009, Massachusetts were only about 173%. But statistics really depend on for how long you run them and what periods you choose. So I ran them from 2005 to 2009, and I found that Massachusetts exports during that period increased by 155%, and the U.S. exports by 169%. Interestingly, very close already because Massachusetts is catching up. One of the reasons is that the categories that we export are a lot more different in value-added categories of products than the rest of the U.S. The top category for the total of the U.S. is soybeans, which is a huge export, for instance, and most of it is scrap, metal, paper, paperboard. So Massachusetts has different export composition here. But just to transition to actual practical issues, I work for the primary export promotion agency in Massachusetts, in central Massachusetts. We provide assistance to a lot of companies that work in China. And really I want to discuss very hands-on practical issues of actually working in China. We heard a lot about the population, the statistics, the great potential, but how does one actually go about setting up operations in China, working with China customs, dealing with a lot of export regulations that were never discussed today, such as export controls, including technology transfer when you're doing R&D there, getting paid by China customs, and some of the other issues, if we have the time, such as standards, options for sourcing, and I also have a list of resources here. When I think about setting up operations, most of the businesses we work with are small and medium-sized enterprises. They don't necessarily go to full-fledged manufacturing facilities. Of course, larger companies do. But operations can take different forms when you think about working in China. It could be distribution system, it could be manufacturing facilities, service engineering, R&D centers. You could be working out of a trade zone. And a lot of companies do both importing from China and exporting to China. If you're having a facility in China, you might be exporting some of the machinery there, some of the capital goods, capital equipment, and then exporting from China back into the U.S. And a very rarely covered topic, if we get to it, is participating in government procurement, which is another opportunity if you're working in China. So how do you, again, this is more of a hands-on setting up operations in China overview. Every company is basically, when operating in China, is issued a business license by the Ministry of Commerce. Business scope is specifically defined in the business license. So the company only can, for instance, they can be allowed to manufacture and or sell and or service their products, or all of them, or just some of those activities. Trading is defined as buying and selling, and until recently, wholly foreign-owned enterprises were not allowed to trade. Now they are getting licenses to trade in China, but they cannot reclaim the VIT. Manufacturers cannot reclaim VIT on trading and vice versa. And that's somewhat of an issue because for a lot of products where VAT rebates from manufacturers in China, the VAT in China is 17%. It truly saves a lot of money when the company has operations there. So even selling spare parts may be considered trading, and some of the manufacturers, some of the companies that set up facilities in China in the manufacturing area are using very special service providers that experience these impulse sale service parts and can obtain duty reductions or exemptions from VAT. Setting up a distribution system in China tends to be a complex process, really, because of the narrowly defined business scope for companies, and it usually involves several parties, more parties than in many other markets in the U.S., for instance. And the reason is that your distributors, domestic distributors, may not be able to import products. They may not be defined as an importer. There's somebody else going to be involved on top of that. Or they may not be able to export, because some companies occasionally use distributors on a regional basis that would work with other countries. That may not necessarily work in China. Manufacturers may not be able to import raw materials or to export products. If you really are working with manufacturers there, so you may use another company as an importer. China legal entity needs to be an exporter of record, and only a China legal entity. That's another complication here. Sourcing agent may not be able to export, for instance. And your sourcing agent may be a company that would help you with sourcing components imported from China, but they may not be able to export them back to you. So again, another company is getting involved. I know there was a question here on how to actually set up operations, and there was a gentleman here from Worcester company that is working in China and said that commission agents do not necessarily work there. And very often what I found when working with smaller companies is that really you have to hire somebody in the China market, even if you're not setting a full-fledged facility there, to work for you. And very often, more commonly than in other emerging markets, companies have a dedicated sales office there, even small companies, and they have direct sales force, which can be managed locally, which is preferable, sometimes from the home base. And then really the CEO, the person who runs that in the company, is going to be there all the time. Then there was also mentioned something about building relationships, but for your direct sales force, there was another complication somewhat. It's the U.S. visa issue, and that may make it difficult to bring your China reps for training to your U.S. facility, for instance. But in general, and that makes it even more important that you go there, but in general, you can still do training there, and occasionally it is possible to bring them over here. I'm not going to really talk a lot about trade zones, but again, there are a lot of them. There are some wholesale and distribution activities that are allowed. There are different types of zones, such as export processing zones, which are only there for export processing reasons, versus free trade zones. Really, rules vary for regions, by region, by zone type. Interestingly, also, and it's important to understand that most products imported into zones must be exported too. What China says, let's say you are making something in one of the zones, you still want to make it in China. What you have to do often is to export from Hong Kong for import to China, which used to make it very difficult. But there are certain new developments there, such as virtual Hong Kong bonded logistics parks in selected areas. That's how you get around this. It's not really Hong Kong, but virtual Hong Kong, very much in the spirit of this time. And using that park, you can actually not pretty much physically leave the facility, but still take advantage of the zones. Here is the zone types, and I know the presentations will be available online, so again, I'm not going to go a lot into this, but this is just to support the presentation. Another important issue is working with China customs. You're importing into China, somebody is importing, again, as a manufacturing facility, as a sales service operation, you may be doing that. Importers are assigned a China customs rating. You start with B. If you're really good, you get an A. If you have problems, it's forwarded to C. And if you're really, really bad, it's forwarded to D. And that is something really a school system, a little bit school mark system. Then you may be suspended even from operations. In successful audits and clean record, your category may be increased to AA. And then if you're filing electronically into your AA, you can get the highest rating, AAA. What it really means for you, if you're importing into China, you really will get faster clearance, fewer problems with the customs, you're not going to be audited as often. That's an important issue. Some of the important challenges, again, there is a list of components, prohibited and controlled commodities that often changes, as it was mentioned here, regulations do change in China. Include some, of course, dangerous drugs and substances, controlled chemicals, antibiotics, arms, ammunition, strategic commodities. These change from time to time too. Rough diamonds, textiles, animals, plants, telecom equipment, game meat, and poultry. There are certain restrictions on imports of those. There are stringent labeling requirements, especially for food products, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, And one other issue, I think most of the Massachusetts companies we work with now know how to handle it, that wood packing materials that are imported into China must undergo treatment and be stamped. Some other issues also, import licensing system applicable to some AV laser discs and electronics products does exist with some chemicals. There are some restrictions on importing plastic and metal waste. And for instance, used goods generally cannot be imported into China unless there is a permit from CCIQ, the China Customs Inspection and Quarantine. Otherwise, the goods must be new, not scratched, and there have been some issues in China if goods were damaged in transit, unfortunately, when this happened. I worked with a couple of companies, they can be resolved. Used goods imported as well can be seized and destroyed, so that's important to know, and there's no line there. Now, when you're exporting from China, there's another set of entities. Again, there's a broad range of them, but some of them are worth mentioning. As I said already, China legal entity must be exporter of record, must file with SAFE as a State Administration of Foreign Exchange. If it's working in the processing zones, if it's working in the trade zones, it must reconcile logbooks and match imports with exports of claiming VAT rebates for duty exemptions. So that's important to know. Some exports are prohibited or require a license. Some raw materials really require a license or are prohibited from export, such as certain types of natural wood, silica sand, etc. There's again a list that changes, that evolves. All agricultural products require a license. And there are some export taxes on products, on several, again, it's more in the raw materials area, but you rarely hear about that, but they do exist. For instance, steel products, pig iron, a lot of other products in the raw materials. One of the questions that we often get is how do you get paid by China customers, but you have to work on that as well. And again, we're not talking here about currency overvaluation, undervaluation, fluctuations, etc. It's really a practical issue of how do you get paid. And you have to, again, understand that China customers must receive permission from the State Administration of Foreign Exchange to transfer funds out of China. So that's something to plan ahead for. It may take more time. You just can't, not anybody can transfer foreign currency out of China. And what is important, again, on the practical side, that commercial invoice must match all the other documents when you are doing that. So it must match purchase order, accounts payable invoice, and if there are any services that are provided locally, they have then to be invoiced separately. You can't just include them in the invoice with the dollar value, unless these services are included in the price, such as warranty and installation. Another issue is the methods of payment. Again, because of foreign currency restrictions, certainly, transfer. Cash in advance may be problematic for certain China customers, unless the product is highly customizable and it's a really big project. Sometimes it's really difficult to get paid in advance. Letters of credit are more expensive. I mean, they are used, but again, there are some issues. They cannot be confirmed when issued by China banks because it's just the way they operate. Non-confirmable letters can be an issue. Letters of credit are supposed to provide a really safe way of getting paid, but if they cannot be confirmed, the issue arises that the bank reputation in China, the issue they don't see has to be really good and reputable, otherwise it's not going to work. Cash on delivery is becoming more common and increasingly expected by Chinese buyers. Again, for a smaller company, that may be an issue, for a smaller company here especially, and there are several products that allow you, financial products that allow you to ensure your receivables, something that we're seeing companies use more and more if you are working in cash on delivery. Something that we haven't talked about yet is also that U.S. controls exports on certain technology. That's a very hot topic right now, export controls. It's becoming hotter and hotter every day. There is a major review undergoing in the U.S. But basically it is the control of exports of certain technology. And we have to be aware of them because China as a destination is very controlled. That has implications not only for tangible products, but also for intangible products. And I'll briefly talk about that a little later. First of all, there is an embargo on military sales to China. In fact, the state controls those regulations, and that includes technology transfer. Military technology transfer is not allowed with an embargo. Then there are certain dual-use items. They are not military, but they can be used for military purposes. This also includes technology transfer. Those items are controlled by the Department of Commerce. Certain dual-use items are controlled for military end use and require require export licenses. This is a very complicated area that we really can't spend a lot of time on, but this is one of the very important issues for any company that is working in China, whether it's just technology transfer or exporting, because that has to be taken into consideration and it has to be part of the plan. Now, according to Rex, it's a very good idea to get an end-use statement from customers in China. And there are certainly certain parties, also individuals, under this export controls regime that cannot receive U.S. goods and technology or require a license again. And I give you a reference here to the Bureau of Industry and Security that describes those parties. There are certain lists online that can be consulted. There is something that was recently introduced for exports to China and India, especially in the areas of technology, that is called Validated End User Program, which makes it easier to export to certain validated end users that are considered very reputable by the U.S. government. But this really is a very limited program for now, and it's not of big use to most of the companies. The penalties are extremely significant. They can range in millions and millions of dollars. Again, just looking at those websites, and it is a vast topic that would have taken my whole presentation. I just wanted you to be aware of this, but penalties can really range in millions and hundreds of millions. The export controls really have implications for operations both outside of China or inside of China. Some of the examples, again, foreign nationals working with controlled or prohibited technology and products. They can't work with military products if they're nationals of China. Or if they are working on a controlled technology that requires a license, they need to get a license to get access to this technology from the U.S. Department of Commerce. U.S. technology, U.S.-based technology is controlled by the U.S. Department of Commerce and U.S. Department of State. And if it's a basis of the development of new technology and products in China, that could also be an issue, whether it could be not permitted at all, that again it's military technology, or it is a dual-use technology and may require a license. Another thing to think about is shipment to China customers that support China military, for instance. And we have a big military defense sector in Massachusetts with a lot of major companies and smaller second and third tier subcontractors working for them. So it really pays to think of whether the French company you're shipping to in China is actually working with the military. That could be a prohibited action. And certainly you have to watch out for transshipments. There are some very common places to transship products to, such as Singapore, for instance, and in some of the Middle Eastern markets where prohibited technology will be transshipped for freight shipping to China. Briefly, I just wanted again to make you aware that government procurement is something that is getting more and more interest from companies, especially those that are located in Massachusetts. Something called government procurement law was issued several years ago. There was preference for domestic supply generally, and rules of origin were really not spelled out by the law, so it wasn't clear on what basis you would qualify a product as made in China. And it wasn't clear if items manufactured in China by the subsidiaries of foreign companies actually qualify. This law applies to both government and quasi-government organizations. State-owned enterprises really are not covered by the law technically, but in practice they may apply. And in January 2010, there was the government published draft implementation regulations for the GPL, and it clarified that GPL applies to tangible and intangible goods, and that goods manufactured in China by wholly foreign-owned enterprises with a certain level of domestic production value qualify. So some of the companies that have operations there and that manufacture goods there could participate in government procurement, though it's really only beginning to happen. It hasn't been a market whose potential is being fully tapped here. I'm not going to go into national indigenous innovation policy, but this is really a push from the China government to develop some technologies in China and to source them for government procurement from the China-based technology companies and R&D centers. Some of the issues doing business in China, we're not going to go through all of them, but again, in the plan, in the market plan for going to China, there are certain other considerations except the ones that we discussed. We already talked a little bit about the BID, which is 17%. There is something called China Compulsory Certification, CCC, and that mainly is adapting your product to the China market. It's a very big issue, and I'll briefly talk about it. There are some other pending regulations, such as RoHS, and sourcing trends, and also the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a big issue right now, and the government has really pushed up the enforcement. The CCC, I think, is probably the most important issue of them. This is the safety certification system in China applicable to 132 product categories. And the number of those products keep expanding. There could be medical devices, electronics, appliances. It really is, anything that is sold in China in those categories, and these are vast, requires a CC mark in China. Non-conforming items will be held by China Customs if they're imported or by other China authorities, and fines can be assessed. There may be exemptions. I give you a couple of websites to look into them, but really, if a product is sold in China in many of those categories, it has to have a CCC mark. The application process is lengthy and can cost a lot of time and money. And the products have to be tested in China. That's one of the biggest hurdles. You cannot do self-certification like with some of the other product standards in other areas of the world, such as in the EU. And third-party results will not apply. So every 12 to 18 months you have to retest. So for any company that's manufacturing in China or that is importing product into China, this is an issue. Some of the sourcing trends were really discussed, and I don't want to go more into them, but again, you're not necessarily setting your facility manufacturing in China. A lot of companies that are smaller source from China. And there are some trends like low to high value, more sophisticated product manufacturing. Costs are increasing, and the quality is increasing from what I hear. There are many sourcing options from the websites and some of the government directories that provide those services, which is Hong Kong Trade Development Council. I listed at the end of the presentation one of them. You can hire a sourcing agent or source via Hong Kong, and a lot of companies do that. Of course, the cost is higher. You may not necessarily have all the control. Or you can set up a legal entity. Again, this may be the third step of penetration in China. These are the resources. And again, the presentation will be available online. I think the most important resources are listed here that we use often. Just a couple of things I wanted to talk about is what we do. Again, this will be now a presentation. We are a primary expert promotion agency in the state. We provide really assistance in all areas of the world, in all those categories. But what I really want to talk about is that, on a very positive note to end this presentation, is that there is a very prestigious award that is given out by SBA every year. It is a national award, and it's called Small Business Expert of the Year. And it's very interesting that coincidentally this year, a company from central Massachusetts has won this national award. This is a company, I urge you to look them up. The name of the company is NanMac. They are located in Framingham. And their biggest achievement that they have really been extremely successful in the China market. So some Massachusetts companies are quite successful. This company has grown its exports in the last 16 years by 400%. They set up operations in China, opening a service facility there, and their employment has increased by 30%. So there are definitely a lot of opportunities, and we worked successfully with this company to help them set up. And I will be very happy if any of the companies here contact us and talk to us about what we can do. Thank you very much.